Fear and fascination collide at Paranormal M. We dive into the darkest tales the world has hidden. Subscribe now. The mystery awaits you. The Ghost in the Courtroom. For those of you who don't know, I work at a county jail. And over the years I've been here, I've seen more odd things than I can even count. I've shared a few before. Among the veterans, there's a little saying that we like to tell to rookies who claim they don't believe in ghosts. Give it time, you will. This most recent incident happened just a few weeks ago. Toward the north end of the building, there's a room that used to serve as a small courtroom. The county built a new one not long ago. So this old space is mostly used for storing extra uniforms, random boxes of files, and broken equipment. What most of the newer staff don't realize is that behind the judge's bench, there's a little hallway. It leads to a single bathroom. It's quiet and rarely used. The veterans like me, we prefer it over the more crowded restrooms. We usually keep the courtroom pretty dim, and there's a soft glow that slips in through the glass panel on the door, enough to find your way around without bothering to flick on the overhead lights. Plus, the light switch is halfway across the room from the bathroom. Anyway. A few weeks ago, I'm on the night shift. Headed into the old courtroom, used the bathroom, and as I stepped out, the open door cast just enough light to spill across the benches. That's when I noticed someone or something sitting toward the back of the room. The figure was hunched slightly forward, facing the judge's bench, absolutely still. As the bathroom door swung shut behind me, the room fell back into darkness. I could only make out the outline of what looked like a man. My first thought was that one of the night crew was pulling a prank. I clicked my flashlight and aimed it straight at him. The beam caught the back of a man's head. Short, dark hair, broad shoulders. "Hey," I said. There was nothing. I hit the strobe setting on my flashlight, figuring it would be enough to startle anybody sitting there. The light blinked once, then twice. And on the third flash, the figure was gone. They were just gone. No sound, no movement, no nothing. I crossed the room, heart hammering in my throat, and flipped on the main light. Empty, not even a creak at the floorboards. Checked under the benches, the corners, even the narrow hallway to the bathroom. There was no one. But when I reached the bench where the figure had been, I rested my hand on the wood. It was warm, like somebody had just been sitting there moments ago. The next morning, brought it up to my supervisor. He'd been here since the place opened back in the mid-'80s. He's a practical man, not the type to spin ghost stories, but when I mentioned the old courtroom, he gave a little nod like he'd been expecting me to ask him. He said, when the courtroom was still in use, staff often came in the morning to find papers scattered and chairs moved and drawers open. They eventually installed cameras to keep an eye on things. And the weird part was, once the cameras were up, the activity stopped completely. But after the remodel, when they removed them, it all started again. Now whenever I use that bathroom, I turn the lights on first, every single time. The Whispering Pillow. This is a story my friend shared with me. Something his mother experienced back when she was young. I'll tell it just the way he told me. When my mom was about 20 years old, long before I was born, she worked at a clothing store a bit far from where she lived. She had to take 2 buses every day. By the time she got home, she was completely worn out. Her neck and shoulders always ached, and she tried everything. Hot baths, massages, and stretching. Relief would never really last long. One day, she finally decided to visit a chiropractor. During the session, the chiropractor kept making casual remarks. "This spot's really tight." Or, "You lean on your right leg a lot, don't you?" She smiled politely, though she was starting to get irritated. Then he said you should get a better pillow. And that hit her and the narrator at the same time, because he could have sworn he just read this the other day. Let's find out, I guess. All of her life, she'd never owned a real pillow. Just bundled up some clothes or towels and used that. It was a small, private thing, and somehow it felt like he'd peeled back a curtain and looked straight into her room. Right then, she decided she wouldn't go back to that clinic. The next day, still feeling lighter after the adjustment, she went to the bedding section at her store and picked out her very first pillow. At the time, memory foam wasn't around, so the options were pretty simple. She ended up choosing a firm buckwheat pillow, the kind that makes a soft rustling sound when you shift it. That night, she slept like she hadn't slept in years, as the narrator recognizes this story very fervently. For the first time in forever, she woke up feeling rested, and a few weeks passed. A coworker noticed and said, "Hey, Susan, you seem so much better lately." My mom mentioned the chiropractor, the pillow, and the whole thing. Coworker laughed and bought the exact same one. But after that, something odd started happening. Her coworker began showing up late to work almost every day. "Why are you so tired lately?" someone asked. She laughed it off. "I just can't wake up. It's like I fall into this bottomless sleep." And strangely, my mom was the same. Even on her days off, she'd sleep straight through the morning, sometimes until late afternoon. Her shoulders didn't hurt anymore, but the sleep felt heavy, as if the pillow was holding her down. Her mom, my grandmother, eventually noticed and said, "You've been sleeping too much and it's not normal." My mom mumbled a half-asleep reply, face pressed into the pillow. And that was the moment she sensed it. Something was off. Not a sound she could name, not a smell she could place. Just a wrongness that made the hairs on the back of her neck rise. She bolted upright and the sleepiness was gone in an instant. Without thinking, she grabbed a pair of scissors and sliced open the pillow. Buckwheat holes spilled out like a burst grain sack. And mixed in with the dark brown husks was something else. My grandmother gasped, because inside was a faded Polaroid photo of a man standing at the edge of a forest waving at the camera. And tangled among the buckwheat were short strands of hair with a bit of pale skin still clinging to them. Ew, last time I read this there was no skin stuck to it, but alrighty then. When they looked inside the fabric of the pillow itself, they saw 3 dark, dragged finger-like marks as if somebody had clawed the lining from the inside. And they didn't hesitate. My grandmother grabbed the holy water she kept in the cabinet, sprinkled it everywhere, muttering a prayer. My mom shoved all the contents into a plastic bag and took it straight to the church. The priest didn't even ask many questions. He blessed it right away. That night she couldn't sleep at all. She kept seeing that man's hand waving in the dark. The next day, she rushed to tell her coworker. Woman went home, checked her pillow. Inside that pillow was another Polaroid, and this time of a different man on a rocky shore, and another lock of hair. 2 dragged finger marks this time. They brought it to the same priest, and he said prayers over it too. The store manager just brushed it off when they reported it and said, "We only got 5 of those pillows, and they're all sold already." The supplier, a completely ordinary bedding company. Nothing suspicious, no trails to follow. To this day, no one knows whether it was a cruel prank or something much darker. But on my mother's pillow, there were 3 marks, on her coworkers too. No one ever found the other 3. Became one of those stories my mom tells on stormy nights, half joking and half serious. Never touched a buckwheat pillow again. I don't see why we have to judge the buckwheat itself. Kinda hungry now, though. The Rooftop Voice. This is the story of Emma, a pseudonym, a colleague of my nurse friend. Read it if you have the time. That night, Emma was working a quiet shift with another nurse in the ward. A few days earlier, one of her assigned patients, Margaret, also a pseudonym, they were scheduled for a heart procedure. So she accompanied her to the pre-op area in front of the operating room. Margaret was in her late 60s. She often mixed up faces and called me Lily, which I later learned was her daughter's name. Every time she saw me, she'd smile faintly and grip my hand like she was afraid of losing it. Even when I helped her change gowns, she'd suddenly stroke my arm and whisper something soft I couldn't quite catch. Sometimes got in the way when I was busy, but couldn't get annoyed. She reminded me of my own grandmother. Often found myself stopping for a little chat with her. Although Margaret's memory was a bit cloudy, she seemed to understand she was heading into surgery. And on the stretcher, she held onto my hand with a fragile but determined grip and her eyes wide with fear. "You're safe. I'll be right here until the door," I told her. Even after the surgical team took over, she wouldn't let go. She shook her head stubbornly, tears in her eyes, until finally, after a few minutes, her fingers slowly loosened and the door closed. The surgery took longer than expected, but it was successful. Later during rounds, I checked every room, and at the very end, I decided to peek into Margaret's room again. She was awake, her face pale but calm, and she asked to talk. I got permission, went back to sit beside her. Her voice was clearer than I'd ever heard, and she said she'd realized I wasn't really Lily when she saw my name badge. But somehow she felt safe with me, and she thanked me over and over for holding her hand before surgery. So I told her, "You'll get stronger each day when you're ready. We'll go outside for some fresh air." She smiled as if that small promise was enough. The way she said thank you before I switched off the lights stayed with me. That night ended with a single emergency. When I got home, I collapsed into bed without dinner. And then the dream came. Margaret, she was on the hospital rooftop, dangling over the edge. My hand locked with hers, and at first I thought I could pull her up easily. Then I saw dozens of shadowy figures clutching her legs, pulling her down. So she screamed at me not to let go, and, "Please, I don't want to go down there." Her grip was burning into my skin. The weight grew heavier, my arm trembling like it would snap, but I couldn't let it go. Everything I had, I pulled her back up. The shadows were gone, below only darkness stretched endlessly. I turned, wanting to get her back into her room, but a violent wind roared up from the void. Then near my ear, a low voice, made of many voices twisting together, whispered, "You shouldn't have interfered." I woke up gasping. I was drenched in sweat. When I checked my right wrist in the shower, a dark bruise circled it, exactly where she had held me in the dream. So I rushed back to the hospital. Morning nurse said she almost crashed last night, but she's stable now. Relief and unease tangled inside me as I remembered that voice. Then Mia, one of the day shift nurses, invited me for breakfast. We went to a small diner nearby, and she was quiet. After we finished eating, she finally asked, "Emma, did you have a strange dream?" My heart was frozen. She had seen something too, I think. She whispered, "I let go in mine," and tears welled up. The patient in her dream had died, a real patient years ago, and ever since the same figure kept appearing, begging her to help. She said that there were always shadows clinging to the patient's legs. I shivered. What if I hadn't pulled Margaret back? And less than a year later, transferred to another hospital. I didn't want to spend another night shift in that ward. Years afterward, I heard Mia had taken her own life. My old coworker said she'd never recovered from her guilt, and she kept repeating it wasn't my fault, till the day she jumped from the hospital stairwell. Margaret, meanwhile, is still alive, and every Christmas she sends me a handwritten card, always ending with the same words: "Thank you for not letting me go." Whispers on Maple Street. I just wanted to share a few moments of my life that I still can't quite explain. Sorry if the story runs a bit long, but over the years I've come to believe not every spirit lingers to scare us, extra plural, to scare us. Some stay to keep watch, and my childhood was quietly shaped by the ghost of a boy in a striped pajama set that we're going to call Eli. These are just a few of my strange, unforgettable memories. Some neighborhoods have picket fences and friendly porch lights, and ours had that too, but it also had something else. Growing up, I always had the sense that something unseen moved around our street. From the boy in the striped pajamas to whispers in empty rooms, the whole block felt like it was holding on to an old story. The first time I saw him, I'm sitting on the living room floor next to my brother, waiting for the school bus. Morning cartoons were flickering on the TV. The light soft and warm, and then a creak. We heard slow, deliberate steps coming down the hallway upstairs, heavy enough to make us both glance at each other. He appeared at the top of the stairs, a boy with messy dark hair wearing blue and white striped pajamas. He didn't look lost, he looked at us like he already knew who we were. My brother and I froze, and then nothing. We vanished between one blink and the next. Just the quiet hum of the TV remained. And that was the beginning. A couple of years later, on a stormy summer night, my brother and I were curled up in our shared room watching old Disney tapes. Rain smacked the window, thunder rolling somewhere far away. I was nodding off when a shadow crossed in front of the TV. The screen went dark, whole room swallowed by black. "Dylan, quit it," I grumbled, thinking he had stepped in front of the player. Then I heard his voice drifting from the kitchen downstairs with my parents. Remember the cold that crawled up my back then, and whoever passed in front of that TV, it wasn't him. One afternoon I passed by the laundry room door and caught a glimpse of Eli again, standing at the bottom of the basement stairs. He didn't move, and neither did I, and by the time I blinked, the space was empty, just the faint smell of detergent hanging in the air. Naming him made things easier. Eli made him feel less like a monster and more like a neighborhood kid who never left. It wasn't just our house either. At my cousin's place 3 doors down, we're making chocolate cupcakes one Friday night. Early 2000s pop songs were thumping from the radio, warm smell of cocoa filling the kitchen, and suddenly the front door creaked open all the way, slammed shut so hard the windows rattled. We all just stared at each other, hands still covering in batter. Nobody laughed and nobody moved. And even my best friend Riley, who lived at the corner house, had her own stories. One sleepover we heard footsteps in her attic crawl space, light and quick, like somebody pacing. The thing was, as her attic was so low no one could stand up there, yet the steps kept going until they stopped just above our heads. Riley used to say a ghost in her house was a woman named Eloise. Over time, it felt like Maple Street itself was haunted, but it wasn't until years later that I learned why. My grandma's neighbor, who had lived there since the 1940s, told us a story once. A boy had lived near the end of the street when he got pneumonia one winter, passed away right at home. He'd been around the same age as me. We had called her ghost Eli, and Riley's ghost Eloise. All names started with E, and then, to learn his real name had been Elijah, I still don't know what to make of that. As a kid, I thought that pajama boy was the strangest mystery I'd ever face. And now I wonder, was it really Elijah, and was Eli ever real? Or did the house just whisper back what it remembered? The Boy in the Elevator. Today, I want to share the true story of a friend of mine who swears he has zero sensitivity to anything paranormal. It happened when he was hospitalized after breaking his ankle. According to him, this took place sometime around 1984, right when Footloose was on every radio station. The hospital was a sprawling concrete building with 6 floors, and he was staying on the 3rd one at the time. Each floor had its own smoking lounge back then. That's awesome. But after 10 p.m., patients could only use the one in the 1st floor lobby. It sounds unthinkable now, but at that time, hospitals still smelled faintly of tobacco smoke after dark. That night he couldn't sleep. His leg was throbbing, and more than anything, he was craving a cigarette. So he slipped a cigarette into his shirt pocket, shoved a crumpled dollar bill into his sweatpants, limped toward the elevator lobby. The indicator showed one elevator resting at the 1st floor, the other on the 6th. When he hit the button, the one on the 6th floor started moving down toward him. With a soft chime, the doors opened and he stepped in and pressed 1. The lobby was quiet and was eerie. Only the vending machines hummed steadily, the sound hollow in the empty space. So he bought a 75-cent can of orange soda, pocketed the quarter change, sat in the smoking lounge. The light above him flickered once he lit a cigarette. Didn't think much of it. When he finished, the first elevator just sort of sat exactly where he had left it in the 1st floor. But when he pressed the button, instead of that elevator opening, the one from the 6th floor started descending again. Weird. Why that one? He stepped inside anyway and pressed 3. The elevator glided upward, 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor. But instead of stopping, it kept going. 4th floor, 5th floor, 6th floor, ding. The sound was sharper than before. The doors slid open. The lights in the hallway were off except for a faint orange glow at the far end. The corridor stretched on like an endless tunnel, and a chill crawled up his neck. He jabbed the close button and there was nothing. He pressed 3 again. The elevator didn't move. And then from the darkness something clicked like a small foot slapping against an linoleum floor. 3 tapping sounds. Then a soft giggle echoed faintly. He heard the laugh and his stomach dropped. He pressed the close button again and again and the doors wouldn't close. The sound grew louder. He heard the laughing again. Then he saw a small boy, maybe 8 years old, barefoot, wearing striped pajamas. His head hung low, but his mouth was wide in a grin that almost reached his eyes. He laughed again. The boy sprinted toward the elevator. The laughter grew sharper, like a skipping record, and he kept pressing the button, and the floors didn't move. The boy ran closer and closer and closer, and just as the boy reached the threshold, the doors began to close. For a second, relief flooded through him. But the boy slipped inside with impossible speed. Cold hands wrapped around his waist. Gotcha! And the lights went out. When he opened his eyes again, he was in his hospital bed. Morning hadn't come yet. Window was still tinted gray with night. His heart raced. His hospital gown was soaked with sweat. That was a dream, he said. But in the quiet of the room, he heard it again, soft and close. he heard the laughter. He sat up trembling, and in his pocket something jingled. He reached in and felt 3 coins, the same change from the vending machine. He really had gone downstairs. He forced himself to look around the room. No one, no boy. But something inside him twisted like a gut feeling, and he slowly lifted the blanket at his feet. The boy. He was curled up underneath, grinning, his teeth too white in the darkness. He laughed again. Blacked out. Asked for a transfer the next morning. Never seen anything like that again. Even if you think you're the most rational person in the world, some nights in hospitals, they hold things that don't quite belong to the living. The vanishing dinner and the missing setup. Okay, kiddos, this is honestly one of the weirdest nights I've ever had in this house. Still get chills thinking about it. About 5 or 6 years ago, I decided I didn't want to go anywhere. Made myself a little self-care night. Pajamas, Netflix on my phone, and the intention of not moving from my bed until morning. I actually enjoy cooking, but when it's just me, I normally grab some crackers or fruit or something simple. And that night, though, I felt inspired and I decided to make myself a real meal. My painter roommate was home too, but he was always in his studio with his doors closed, headphones on. He never wants to be bothered. So I cooked, like really cooked, homemade pesto pasta, boiled the noodles, toasted pine nuts, sautéed zucchini, and made the sauce from scratch. Took about 40 minutes, and I was proud. I plated it nicely on this deep ceramic bowl I'd gotten at the thrift store, grabbed a fork and a napkin, walked into my room with the plate balanced in one hand and my foot gently pushing the door shut behind me. My bedroom has 2 doors. One connects to the kitchen, the other leads to the back hallway with the bathroom and a small patio. I set the plate carefully on my bed. It was close to my phone, dead center of the mattress. Headed to the bathroom. It was maybe me being gone 10 seconds. I didn't even close the bathroom door. No need to. Just me and my hermit roommate, after all. I could see most of my room from there anyway, so I walked back in. My plate was gone. It was just gone. Fork and napkin still sitting neatly on the bed like nothing happened. The smell of fresh pesto still hanging in the air, too. I froze and I started doubting myself. Did I leave the food in the kitchen? Did I imagine setting it down? Did it somehow slide off the bed by itself? I mean, the plate wasn't even slippery. Checked the floor, nothing there. I knocked on my roommate's studio door, which already felt weird because we barely talked. He opened it with this, "Why are you interrupting my genius?" face. "Hey, you mess with me?" I asked. My food disappeared. His eyebrow lifted and he said, "What?" I explained and he sighed, and curiosity replacing his usual annoyance, and he followed me back. We checked everywhere, under the bed, behind my nightstand, under my blanket. Nothing. And then I noticed the plate on the other side of the room, behind a stack of laundry like 9 feet away. I picked it up and it was completely empty. The sauce smeared across the bottom looked like somebody had dragged their fingers through it, not fork marks, but fingers. We searched like idiots. The food had to be somewhere. Next to my bed was a woven basket I used for scrap paper and sketches. No trash bag, just crumpled paper. I lifted the top layer, and there it was, my dinner, sitting under the paper balls like somebody had gently tucked it in. No sauce on the paper, but perfectly hidden. At this point, my roommate gave me this look like, sure, and Santa helped too. I got so frustrated and actually teared up, which I never do. I'd worked hard on that dinner. It wasn't funny to me. He mumbled something like, "Your night gets better," and just walked off. After 5 seconds, he reappeared in my doorway, and he was pale and shaking a little bit. "This isn't funny. Are you pranking me?" "No, what happened?" He went to his studio, and his entire computer setup, the laptop, monitor, and speakers was gone. And this guy treated his gear like his firstborn. He would never leave it unsecured. We searched everywhere. Eventually found it in the laundry room at the back of the house, 25 feet away. The laptop flipped upside down, speakers placed neatly on either side, like somebody arranged them with purpose. No noise, no footsteps, no nothing. We stood there, and it was quiet in the house. Ended up eating a bag of chips in bed while staring suspiciously at every corner of my room. The only explanation that made me feel slightly okay was convincing myself some weird ghost had saved me from accidentally poisoning myself. Better a weird ghost than an invisible pasta thief. Whispers beneath Carnley Park. And I might pronounce that wrong, so I'm gonna try a different way to say it. I'm 15, and I live near Cairnley Park, and to most people it's just another quiet pocket of Victoria, Australia. It's a suburb with winding streets, neat houses, and playgrounds where children run without ever wondering what lay here before. But to me, Cairnley Park is something else entirely. It is home, yes, but it's also a place that hums when no one is listening, where shadows seem to breathe and where history does not sleep beneath the soil. This series, Whispers Beneath Carnley Park, is not make-believe. These are simply fragments of what I've seen, what I felt, and what I learned. They tell of the ground I walk on, of the suburb that wraps around me, and of the past that still stirs beneath it. But what's done here hasn't been laid to rest, at least not for me, and, well, I don't think for anyone. Long before houses and driveways appeared, this place was not meant for families. It was once fenced, locked, and kept in silence. It was a wartime storage site, a production ground for things that buried and tore and roared. Munitions built here for a world far away. But not everything built here left. Not everything burned the way it was supposed to. The Albion fires. Few speak of them now, but the ground remembers. The explosions left no headlines that lasted. Only records buried underneath more records, and bodies buried with no names said aloud. Women and men were lost in the quiet of duty. The air then was smoke, and it hasn't forgotten. Soil, it holds more than dirt. Silence, it holds more than nothing. Silence is simply waiting. And there are places where people live on top of unfinished stories. Cairnley Park is one of them. In daylight, it's harmless. Playground, laughter, chatter of birds, and footsteps of those who believe the ground is just ground. Maybe a gecko screaming in the distance. But when darkness folds itself over the streets, the earth thickens. It isn't just the night, it's memory. The wind here doesn't just chill, it carries something bitter. Rooms that look ordinary feel heavier at night. A corner of your vision doesn't clear as fast as it should be, and the earth shifts as if remembering too much. Iron and soot lie under every step. Regret seeps through every quiet evening, and a past that does not rest watches. It does not forgive, it does not go away. These are the whispers beneath Cairnley Park. Whispers at Black Creek. When I was 17 in 2004, Something happened to me and my friend near an old stretch of train tunnels. A place people in town liked to whisper about but never really stayed after dark. A dark history. The area had a heavy history. Years ago, a father and daughter drowned in the creek that curled through the forest like a black ribbon. An old caretaker was found hanging from a crooked sycamore tree leaned over the water. The kind of tree that already looked haunted without needing a story behind it. There had also been a shootout between local police and poachers at an abandoned cabin not far from there. And before all of that, when the train tunnels were being carved through the hillside, there was cheap laborers who had died in collapses. Their unmarked graves were rediscovered only a few years earlier. The tiny forgotten cemetery at the edge of the woods. The night we camped. 4 of us, me, my cousin, and 2 friends, decided to camp there the week before graduation. One last dumb idea before real life split us in different directions. We set up on a flat patch of land near the creek, a good 20 yards from the water, fire crackling, stars overhead. Everything felt strangely quiet. My cousin and I wandered down to the creek to shine our flashlights into the water, hoping to spot fish. And that's when we heard it. 3 sloshing sounds. The sound of somebody walking through shin-deep water, slow and steady and deliberate. But when we swept our lights upstream, nothing was there. What we did see were ripples, perfect and even, like footsteps moving toward us. When we killed the lights, the sound returned. Light on, silence. Light off, sloshing. That was the moment my stomach nodded. It was responding to us. We didn't say anything. We just hurried back to camp. And as we turned, the sloshing raced toward where we had just been. Too fast for any person or animal we knew. By the time we reached the fire, the noise stopped at the bank. Then the tall grass behind us bent and shivered like something unseen was running the perimeter of our camp. Too fast to be a deer, too smooth to be the wind. The voice. It began as static, like the hush between radio stations. Then a man's whisper right against my left ear. "We shouldn't be here," I said before realizing no one had spoken to me. My friend's eyes went wide. They'd heard it too. The whisper grew clearer and deliberate. "You need to leave." We froze because for a second I thought a group of people was out there circling us. And in the woods at night, there was more terrifying things than ghosts. But we turned toward the ATV. All 4 of us saw this man. A black figure, tall, lean, wearing what looked like a brimmed hat. They leaned against the front of the ATV like it had been waiting. No feet. Legs shimmered like heat over asphalt. And though it was a shadow, it stood out darker than the night itself. When it straightened, the girl with us, she just screamed, and that broke us out of our paralysis, and the shadow zipped like it was pulled backward, disappearing toward the train tunnels. The ATV, which had started perfectly fine earlier, mind you, struggled to turn over like the battery had been drained, and it finally caught, and we got the hell out of there. Echoes in the dark. Later, after sharing the story, we found out dozens of people had felt something there. A trapper once told my uncle it was the only place in the county he refused to walk alone after sundown. "Even the raccoons clear out at night," he said. A few weeks after that night, my uncle went raccoon hunting there. His dog dislodged a rock from a ridge and it struck him in the neck, paralyzing almost his entire body. Somehow he dragged himself back to his ATV and drove out alone, and he never explained how. Years later, around Halloween, when my story started circulating on Facebook again, My uncle texted my mom. I never told anyone this. That man in the hat, the one the kids saw, he's the one who picked me up and put me back on my ATV. One final thought. For years I believed the shadow wanted to scare us away, and now I'm not sure. Maybe it wasn't the danger, maybe it was the warning. Whatever else was in those woods that night might have been worse. The blue door and the man in overalls. A few summers back, my dad told me that we were taking a trip to see my grandmother in Virginia. She'd lived there for years, ever since she left the old house in the countryside. I asked if that was where my dad grew up. He shook his head and told me, calm way he does when the story's about to begin. He said his childhood home was actually an old boarding house in the hills of West Virginia. Used to be a farmhouse, he said. Then a boarding house, and then some things happened there. The voice in the attic. When my dad was a boy, he and my grandma moved into the place with the help of her own mother, and while unpacking boxes upstairs, their cat, Muffin, slipped past and ran into the attic. Grandma pushed the attic door closed, ready to head downstairs. That's when she heard a voice from inside the attic sing-song softly. Here, kitty, come here, pretty kitty. And the strange part is, at that exact moment, my great-grandmother, still on the phone with her, they gasped and asked, "Who's talking on your end?" Grandma whispered back, "That's what I was going to ask you." Then the attic door creaked open on its own. Muffin shot out like a bullet, tail puffed up, eyes wide, hissing as she fled outside, and she never came back. The bookcase. For a while, nothing else happened. Then one afternoon, when Grandma came home from the store, she found the great oaken bookcase in the parlor, the one that had been bolted to the wall, lying twisted in the middle of the floor. But the china plates had been inside, they weren't broken. They were lined up perfectly in a single row on the kitchen counter, as if somebody had carefully placed them there. Dad once told me that some people say spirits don't like certain objects, and he himself doesn't particularly believe in ghosts, but I do. The stain. Near the sink in the kitchen, there was always a reddish-brown stain on the floorboards. No matter how many times Grandma scrubbed it, it stayed. And when somebody stepped on it, the floor creaked in a way that made the hair on your neck stand up. Long before it became their house, it had been a small hotel. And a story went around about a traveling businessman shot by another guest in the kitchen. My dad never knew why, and he did say that on quiet nights, lying in bed, he could hear footsteps crossing that spot. Slow and measured, like someone pacing. Moving out. After the bookcase incident, Grandma started hearing shuffling in the halls when she was alone. And once she even saw a figure, just a shape really, moving toward the kitchen. And that was enough. They began packing to leave. While clearing the old freezer they used as storage, Dad opened a drawer and found their missing embroidered plates, a lighter, even a pack of cigarettes, things they had lost months earlier. No one could explain how they got there. Uncle Peter. When they left, the house went to my Uncle Peter. He was a retired truck driver. And at first everything was quiet, and then one night, sitting in his reading chair, he heard footsteps in the hallway. A short man with messy dark hair and sad blue eyes, blue overalls. They appeared in the doorway. The man didn't face him at first. He was staring at a faded painting on the wall. "Hey!" Uncle Peter shouted. The man turned and then vanished like smoke. Grandma got the call a minute later. Someone's in my house. When she arrived, Uncle Peter was sitting on his bed, hand shaking, shotgun pointed at the door. The night after. From then onwards, Peter claimed the invisible man would drag him from his bed into the hallway, slap and punch and even bite him. But the man never crossed into the parlor. That was quote-unquote safe ground. When Dad was about 14, they spent a night there. Peter handed him an old patchwork quilt, the so-called magic blanket, and then he said, "Doesn't come past the parlor, you'll be fine." Dad stayed up trying to catch the man. Around midnight, he said he felt a presence before he saw anything. Figure stood in the doorway staring, and then it was gone. When the grandfather clock chimed 6, footsteps echoed toward him again. Uncle Peter appeared, smiling weakly. "See, the blanket works." The last sight. Years later, after Peter passed away of natural causes, Grandma saw him or something again. A short man in blue overalls with a black goatee, walking up the front path. He paced on the porch, stopped at the door, and disappeared. Grandma always said it was like a family ghost, and I don't still really know what that means, but I at least do know that none of us ever set foot inside that house again. The Midnight Call. This happened in late October 2022, just a few days before Halloween, actually. My girlfriend and one of her closest friends have owned a small beauty salon since late 2020. And for everything business-related, from Instagram posts to client messages, they use a single iPhone. It's always left at the salon overnight. That year, to celebrate the season, they decided to decorate the place with an altar inspired by Dia de Muertos, or the Day of the Dead. If you've ever watched Coco, you know the idea. Families build altars with photos, candles, flowers, favorite food of their deceased loved ones, believing their spirit returns to visit for one night. That evening, after finishing up at the salon, my girlfriend came home as usual. We had dinner, talked a bit, and went to bed early. She stayed up watching a series on Netflix because falling asleep quickly has never been her thing. Sometime around 2:40 a.m., she shook me awake, absolutely terrified. At first, I thought she'd seen a jump scare on TV. I couldn't even get the words out. Just kept pointing at her phone, and I held her for a while until she calmed down enough to speak. She told me she'd just gotten a FaceTime call. Not from anyone random, but from the salon's iPhone. At first, she thought maybe her friend was there late doing inventory or setting up decorations. So she answered. But the only thing she saw was the salon ceiling, the angle they always leave the phone charging at. She called out her friend's name, and there was silence. Just the faint red glow of the nightlight in the corner. She hung up feeling a chill down her spine, opened the security camera app. If it was a break-in, she'd see it. But the place was empty. Then she rewound the footage from the moment of the call, and it was clear as day. iPhone's screen lit up on its own, unlocked somehow, and dialed her number on FaceTime. I don't think anybody touched it. What made it worse was that the phone was password protected. Only she and her friend knew the code. It hadn't just glitched. It had chosen her contact specifically. The next morning, she showed everyone the footage. Nobody had an explanation. Some whispered it might have been connected to the altar, since in some beliefs you're inviting spirits to cross over. And that was the first and last time they ever put up a Day of the Dead altar at the salon. Even now, 3 years later, whenever the story comes up, everybody gets goosebumps. Has anybody else ever experienced something like this? Not me. A demon passed on by telling a story. So I want to clarify that this experience happened before my little footstep story. This happened when I was in middle school, so roughly 2002 to 2004. Not sure exactly when, but I was a bit younger. Also happened in the same house. This house I grew up in from grade 3 to graduation in high school, so plenty of stories to tell. Okay, now I will tell the story that I was told. The experience my at-current middle school boyfriend crush had happened to him. He had this happen to him because his friend told him their story, and now it was his turn to tell me his. So my friend told me that this cat, or what seemed like a cat, was in his room one night. He didn't own any cats, so it was confusing. But funny enough, when he got a good look at it, it didn't have fur and definitely had red eyes. Well, last night I had an experience that I will never really think I'd have happen to me. My cat Larry was a black female cat, was in my closet and just kind of sitting there staring out. He told me the eyes were like Larry's, yellowish green. So it was getting close to bedtime, and I know she likes to cuddle with me, so I went to pick her up. Called her name, did the whole pss, 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 pss. But she seemed comfortable where she was. But I wanted to cuddle her, so I reached out to pick her up, and she took a swing at me. And Larry wasn't an aggressive kitty, mind you. He had taken a breather, and he was quite shook as one would be if their cat suddenly took a full clawed swing at them. But I don't think it was Larry. When she swung at me, the paw was larger than the claws. There was only 3, and they were big and jet black. Yeah, I know she is black too, but it wasn't fur I saw. Looked more like leather or hairless. Definitely not my girl. Anyways, I'd pulled my hand away fast, or I thought I did, but I got scratched before seeing one of the claws strike the floor. A little mad, I got up and went to bed, and I honestly thought I was dreaming. Didn't feel real. Well, come morning, when I was getting ready for school, I saw the scratch in my hand, and then last night it came back to me. Checked my closet, and there was a small hole in the floor. Carpet bits beside it. But Larry wasn't in the closet. Apparently, she was sleeping with my parents, so I think I now know what it was. So he told me his friend's story after his, and I was highly intrigued by it all. But I clung in slowly, as I was now told a story about his cat creature and perhaps a demon. I mean, leatherish skin, 3 thick-toed claws, and color-changing eyes. And apparently, the tail was long and slender, much like a lizard's would maybe be. Some details are still fuzzy, but of course I remembered the story aspect. Kinda sticks with you. But hey, I've told this story many times, and so far it hasn't happened to anyone else. So now, I'll tell my part of the story for you. So after my friend told me all of this, it was a few days before I had my own experience with this creature. Now I lived with my parents, my brother, and we had one cat. One black one who was more my parents' cat than anything. So one night I'm asleep in bed when I hear a little growl. Now our cat didn't really growl at anything, so I stirred a bit hearing it, but a bit louder. Slowly walking, I sat up a bit and leaned over, reaching out to try to coax our cat over. His name was Bandit. Bandit would always come when called, but this kitty, or what I thought was a kitty, didn't come. It was pitch black in the house, and all I saw was a faint outline from the outside light peeking underneath my window curtain. And this creature was larger, but not much bigger than a normal cat. Its eyes were staring at me, bright yellow with a tinge of red as it growled once more at me. Its tail thumped and then it hissed at me. I don't remember the sound it made exactly, but it definitely wasn't a normal cat's hiss. Fed up, I just told the cat to go away, as I thought I, too, was just dreaming and seeing stuff. I fell back asleep till morning. But crazy enough, this I remember. After I pulled my blanket back up and rolled over, I felt something jump onto my bed and lay down. Okay, so yeah, I know this sounds crazy and possibly made up, but no, all of it's true. When I woke up the next morning, I asked my mom if she heard the growling sounds, and she did. I asked if Bandit was with her all night, and she said yes again. I left it at that, knowing it was real and not a dream or hallucination. Well, I told a friend the same story. She then had an experience. I don't know what happened after that, so far from time to time, till this day, I'll still feel a phantom cat jumping up where I'm sleeping and lay down next to my feet. Hope you enjoyed my story. Don't worry, I don't think this demon kitty follows anyone anymore. The Lost X-Files episode, and a man in white. Paranormal encounter that shook my reality. Complete summary of my unknown X-Files episode. One evening while watching TV, I came across a very strange episode of the X-Files. This episode was presented as a special, which immediately caught my attention. What was particularly odd was that it seemed to be linked to the Twilight Zone, a crossover that never actually existed. The episode began with an aerial shot of a deserted road, surrounded only with electric pylons, filmed as if by a drone. The camera slowly advanced down the road and a man's voice began to speak. Welcome to a special episode of the X-Files, linked to the fourth dimension. Tonight you will enter another dimension, an unknown and unexplained world filled with inexplicable phenomena. This episode is unique and special, and it will only be broadcast on this channel, nowhere else. Settle in and enjoy. Tonight, welcome to the fourth dimension, in connection with the X-Files. The atmosphere was already unsettling, and this feeling of strangeness intensified. The camera then rose to reveal a small town isolated in the middle of a desert. In the next scene, Scully arrived in this deserted town. She parked in the town center and got out of her car. It was nearby. And there was another car parked as well, carrying a family. A father, a mother, a boy about 9, and a 7-year-old girl. The family seemed disturbed, especially the father, who was telling his son to calm down. The family headed toward a store across from the phone booth where Scully was making a call to Mulder. During the call, Scully explained to Mulder that she had stopped in this small town for dinner and would return late that evening. Mulder talked about a recent case that they had investigated, but Scully has always remained skeptical about the paranormal conclusions. Mulder tried to convince her to be more open-minded. While on the phone, Scully noticed something odd. The family inside the store was acting strangely. She saw the father, and then in an instant he vanished. The mother then hurriedly exited the store with her children, but without the father. Intrigued, Scully cut off her conversation with Mulder and rushed toward the mother, asking her where her husband had gone. The mother, nervous, asked Scully to leave them alone, but as she placed her hands on Scully's shoulder, she suddenly whispered desperately, "Help us, please." Before she could say more, the boy insisted that they get back in the car. Scully got into her own car and decided to follow them discreetly. After about 15 minutes of driving, Scully arrived at the family's house. She got out of her car and knocked on the door. The mother opened it. Scully showed her FBI badge and explained that she was investigating paranormal phenomena. The mother, frightened, replied that everything was fine, and that Scully was just an old friend, to avoid alarming her son, who was watching from the doorway. But as soon as the door closed, the mother panicked and quickly whispered to Scully that her son wasn't normal, that he had terrifying powers. He confided that the boy had made his father disappear, and that she feared for her life and that of her daughters. The conversation took a dramatic turn when the boy suddenly appeared at the door and said to his mother, "That's not your friend, Mom. It's the lady we saw earlier." In a chilling tone, he ordered his mother to go inside the house, and instantly she obeyed as if controlled by an invisible force, while the boy added, "You lied to me. You will be punished." With a wave of his hand, he made his mother's mouth disappear, preventing her from speaking. Shocked, Scully tried to reason with the boy, but he forced her into the house. What followed was a disturbing scene. The boy's sister, concerned, asked what was happening, and furious, the boy made his little sister disappear with a snap of his fingers. The mother, in a panic, attempted to grab a weapon of some kind, probably to attack her own son, but before she could do anything, she also disappeared. Scully suddenly found herself transported to the boy's bedroom. He was sitting on his bed crying and confessing that he didn't want to hurt his family, but that he always felt rejected and unloved, and Scully tried to comfort him, explaining that his powers were extraordinary, but that he needed to use them for good. Finally, the boy stood up and opened a door that led to infinity, as if it opened to the universe itself. He stepped inside, leaving Scully alone in the room, and everything returned to normal. The house, the town, and everything around seemed restored as if nothing had happened. But the family had completely disappeared. Scully, still shaken and troubled, got back into her car, resumed her journey, and the episode ended. Well, that certainly was a description of an episode, and I almost remember that. I'm a little bit confused, though. Weird paranormal activity keeps happening in my house. Some unusual things have been happening to me lately in my house, and I figure this might be a good place to discuss them. Let me give you a breakdown of everything. In August of last year, my grandmother passed away. It was devastating, but I've gotten better as time moved on. However, some creepy things keep happening in my house. I honestly have a difficult time trying to wrap my head around it. Now, I know this is going to sound like I'm making this up, and I don't have any photos or videos to back up what I'm going to say, but multiple members of my family have been experiencing creepy things as well, and I just need to share it with everybody here. 4 major events have happened to me, and I'll share them. I live in a 4-bedroom house, and there's 6 people, including me and 3 cats. And the first paranormal event happened when my siblings and I were talking to our mom about chores. And as the conversation was starting to become more argumentative, our Alexa, out of nowhere, started playing Baby Shark, which was strange since nobody in our conversation said any words, at least anything similar to the song that was playing. Also, what makes it more interesting is the fact that my grandmother used to play Baby Shark all the time for my baby cousin, either on her phone or the Alexa. It makes me believe that my grandma played that song to prevent an argument that was about to happen. The second event that happened was when I was working on my computer. I was completing college assignments, and I was at my desk in the living room, and as soon as I was finished writing a paragraph, I looked up and saw my back door randomly open. I know that door was closed because 10 minutes before it opened, my dad fully closed the door shut when he was bringing in laundry, and my mom was also there. The third event happened when I was home alone. I got back from watching Goodfellas. I was at a friend's house. My family left to help my aunt prepare for her upcoming pregnancy. I was sitting at my desk watching some YouTube until I thought I heard something coming from the dining room. As soon as I looked over, the chair from my kitchen table was pulled out right in front of me. It wasn't any of my cats because one was sleeping on the couch and the other 2 were put away. And finally, the creepiest event is the kitchen light. The light in my kitchen is interesting, to say the least. The light bulb is just dying or almost dead, but it doesn't blink or anything until it does. My sister and I are cleaning the dishes one night until we start noticing the light blinking. The light's above the kitchen sink, and as a joke, my sister asked me to ask a question to the light. So I asked the cliche question, "Are you there?" The light stopped blinking and blinked twice. When that happened, my sister and I looked at each other and she asked me, "Did the light answer your question?" And after being shocked, I told the light to blink once for no and twice for yes. The light blinked 2 more times. I started asking it questions and the light was answering all my questions. My sister started becoming more uncomfortable and finished up the dishes. I was going to leave until I asked her to stay. I asked the light if it was here to talk to someone, and it blinked twice for yes. So we went down the list of names who the light wanted to see until he mentioned my dad. The light blinked twice for yes. My sister decided enough was enough. Went to bed, but before I left, I asked the light if it was somebody I used to know, and it said yeah. And the only name that came to my mind was Grandma, and I asked, "Grandma, is that you?" And the large light blinked twice. Now I don't know what I should do, whether I should ignore all of this or try something to do about it. But now what worries me is that if it's my grandma, is she trying to communicate from beyond this world, or is it something more sinister? I keep being lured by something in a local abandoned church. In my local area, there's a church, long since abandoned, left to rot. I've been inside it once, years ago. It left me with reoccurring surrealist nightmares about being trapped in it with a vicious, obvious hostile force, almost always resulting in my death before waking. Most commonly by throwing myself from the steeple, always waking either before that end or just as the force makes contact with me physically. Since then, any time I walk past it, I can feel something within me watching me. And more recently, any time I've been stood, just beyond its fencing, I can feel whatever it is beckoning me closer. It's hard to describe. It's been fine until today, when I stood beyond the fence for around 15 to 20 minutes before stalking around the property looking for a way in, almost as if compelled to get inside it. And even now I find myself looking at the corners on the wall of my home, distance away from it, and I figured out that the corner I'm looking is essentially the abandoned church. Just kind of wanted to type that. Not sure if anybody has any advice or conclusions which can be given without the specifics of the church and her location. Not sure if this is the right place for this, though, or with the right flair. I probably shouldn't give the specific church and location because it might narrow me down too, so all I can say is it's not that old compared to most churches in Britain, only around 100 years old. It's disused and boarded up with metal fencing keeping the general public away. Had its graveyard removed around 3 years ago now. Help me make sense of the paranormal history of my late grandmother's house. So without further ado, whether you're looking for a ghost story or looking to debunk some stuff, I'll start my account. I am a 20-year-old male, and this all started before I was born. I'll do my best to state the order of events chronologically. But these stories all come from different people in my family, so it might be a bit messy. My grandma has owned a trailer in Broomfield, Colorado for nearly 40 years. My father, his 2 brothers, and his 2 sisters grew up in this house. And me and my father also lived in this house with my grandma and grandpa later down the road. I'll give each story an account, a name, and an approximate date, as well as say who told me the story. 1985, 3-fingered lady. This one comes from my grandma, and at a separate point in time, my dad as well. My eldest uncle Ryan, when he was young, was just about 10 or 11. Had just got his own room, and he would tell my grandma about a 3-fingered lady in his closet that would talk to him at night. And one night, my grandma heard banging on her door in the middle of the night and screaming. Opening the door, she found Ryan, who was screaming and crying with blood coming out of his leg. He told her the three-fingered lady tried to drag me into the bed, tried to take me to hell. And after that night, they never heard about her again. Well, that's good. This one, at least, is a kind of distant layer of truth to it, because after his passing in the hospital 30 years later, I saw a scar in his leg and 3 lines going down to his calf. 1990. My favorite year. Open the door. This one comes from my grandpa. My grandma was a nurse, so she used to get home really late. And one night, my grandpa woke up to the doorknob on his bedroom door jiggling. He could hear my grandma saying, "John, let me in, the door's stuck." But when he opened it, my grandma wasn't on the other side. He looked down the hallway and didn't see my grandma anywhere. Coming back to bed, he said that my grandma was asleep next to him already. Year 2000. The Man in the Corner. This one also comes from my grandpa and my great-uncle Rick. It was late night and Rick and John, my grandpa, were up late watching cable. John went to grab a beer, Rick went to take a piss, and on his way down the hallway after pissing, Rick passed who he thought was his grandpa, standing in the hall. He said, "The fuck are you doing, John?" Before continuing to the living room where John was drinking his beer. John said, "Who are you talking to?" Then they searched the whole house, but nobody was inside except the kids and my grandma, all a bit asleep. The year 2000 again. Moving furniture. This one comes from my dad and my youngest Aunt Jamie. Once every couple of months, upon returning home from days out, the family would find rooms, and one time the TV was knocked off the entertainment center broken. In 2005, The Face. From my brother's twin Aaron, I'd like to note that I was born this year, and I was the first grandchild of my family. My grandma once said that I was having grandchildren made the devil angry, or having grandchildren made the devil angry, because things got worse in the house after I was born. My uncle was homeless at the time, and my grandma let him stay on the couch, and apparently kept hearing breathing. Whenever he closed his eyes, he would see a face looking at him. 2007, The Seance. I've seen a video recording of this one, actually, and I'll be honest, I have no idea what's happening in the video. The recording's on a camcorder somewhere. My whole family decided to do a seance where they read the Bible and try to get rid of the demon in the house. In the video, you can see my family reading the Bible into a dark room, and I swear to God, you can hear growling come from the video. It's really weird, but maybe one of my family members made the noise, I don't know. A plate fell off a shelf in the video and breaks as well. 2007 and onward. Crosses fall off walls, people see things out of the corner of their eyes. People feel like stuff is clinging to their backs. Things move slightly and stuff breaks randomly. And my own personal experience. I've never seen anything overtly sinister happen in this house, but something strange has happened to me, and I rarely dream, almost never. When I do, it's always good. But there has never ever been a night that I stayed in that house that I didn't have a nightmare. They started when I was about 6. From then on, they only came back when I slept in that house. Also, I fully believe that my family believes that that house is haunted. Since I was a baby, I've been taught that, well, honesty is a core value, and my father's number one peeve is when, well, pretty much when I lie. I can't see my family lying about this stuff and keeping the lie up for decades, even though bad fallouts and arguments and everybody agreed that house was evil. I'm making that post because my grandma passed recently, and in her final hour she told us to take her somewhere else. She didn't want to die in that house. She refused. It's strange, but I'm sure it can be explained. If you have any questions or theories, please tell me. I want everything to be finally debunked. If you have nothing, enjoy the stories, I guess. I got summoned to purgatory last night as a guide. I don't normally dream. I usually go to sleep and wake up with no recollection of any dream whatsoever. Occasionally I'll get a nonsensical dream about my daily experiences. Last night was different. My dream was so vivid and cohesive, and I truly felt like I was serving a purpose there. I was brought to purgatory to be a guide to people that had trials there. All of these people were attempting suicide or on the brink of suicide. They were between life and death and were faced with different trials. If they passed their specific trial, they got a second chance at life. If they failed, then they passed on. My job was to give hints to them about how to pass their test. They had to realize what in their life could help them out of their situation. I was able to save 2 people, but I lost 1. The first person I helped was a teenage girl. Her specific trial was an obstacle course set in a bog type of thing. The water wasn't water, but was a slime that could cling to your skin, slow you down if you touched it. She was being chased by a shadowy being. Her only goal was to not be caught. I was helping her, though, and this going over and over again until she realized that she was able to face the monster with the help of her friends. She woke up from her attempt in her bathtub with a pill bottle in her lap. She tried to OD, but earned her second chance at life. I could only speculate, but the monster was either her mom or bullies at school. I think it uttered the phrase, "commit to gun mouth," at one point, making me think bullies. Never heard that sentence in my life. The second person was a man, mid-30s, and very obviously had a manual labor job by his build. He was digging in a mine, but kept getting buried by cave-ins. In this one, I told an anecdotal story about how family is one of the pillars of healthy life, and he was able to realize that he could use his family, spirituality, and other aspects of his life to lean on, just to kind of help him out of the trouble. In his case, for everything he realized, he could rely on it, physically manifested as a pillar to help hold up the mine. The strongest being his wife and daughter. She was about 3 and cute as a button. He woke up in his recliner with an empty bottle of Jack at his feet and a revolver in his hand. He cried for a bit and he went to hold his family, and I'm guessing his trial represented all the things in his life he was trying to deal with and felt overwhelmed. The last guy in the room was suffocating. Literally darkness. I was there trying to get him to realize that even the smallest of things could be the light of your life. He had a tuxedo cat that adored him. He was supposed to realize that even small things could light up his darkness and provide warmth. Would have literally spawned a light, then he could see the way out. But he didn't listen. The darkness got him and snuffed him out. I saw him jump off the top of a building, and he passed on. His trial was supposed to represent his struggle with depression. Well, pretty sure anyways. It was a surreal experience to have something like that. And if you were one of the people that I helped above, well, keep it up and I believe in you. She turned, not slowly, not unnaturally. Well, not naturally. She spun around in one smooth, unnatural motion, like a puppet on a string, and her face locked onto ours. Her eyes were shadowed but fixed, her expression blank, yet somehow furious. Her skin was pale and too pale, stretched too tightly across her cheekbones and pointed chin. The second she looked at us, the world seemed to drop. A coldness slammed into my chest, sudden and bone deep. My skin prickled and every hair standing on end. My stomach lurched like I was falling, but I hadn't moved and I couldn't move. It felt like time stopped, but only for a second. Then everything in us screamed, not out loud, not even in words, just run. That wild animal panic that lives deep in your gut. The kind you can't reason with, the kind that keeps you alive. We bolted, No warning, no signal, just instinct. Legs pumping, breath catching in our throats, the echo of our footsteps, loud in the stillness. Down into the tunnel walkway we went, the lights overhead flickering dimly like they might die at any second. The air was thicker down there, like breathing through wet cloth. Our footsteps slapped against the concrete, and we didn't speak, and there was nothing even to say. Halfway through, we slowed just enough to glance behind us, and she was there, still following. Closer. Too close. And she wasn't running. She was walking that same slow, deliberate walk. But somehow she was nearly right behind us. Her arms hung loose by her sides, her shoulders stiff, and her head tilted slightly, like she was studying us. Like she didn't really need to run to catch us. Her movements were silent, not a sound was made. It made no sense. She made the tunnel feel longer than it was. We ran harder. Our lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. The exit was just ahead, the stairs leading back up to the street. We scrambled up them two at a time, nearly tripping, hearts thudding like drums in our ears, and I turned and she was there on the steps, still walking, still gaining. I didn't understand it. Like how? We were running flat out and she had moved faster than a crawl. But there she was, her face still calm, still blank, eyes locked onto us like we were already caught. We hit the street and kept going, sprinting down the sidewalk, past shops and shuttered houses. The lights above us blurred and our feet thundered on the pavement. I looked back again. She was still there, not running, not stopping, still walking, and somehow closer. We didn't stop until we saw them. Two men standing near a crossing, smoking, talking softly under the weak glow of the street lamp. We made a beeline straight for them. Our fear was plain in our faces, and they looked confused and, well, startled even. And when I turned back, she was gone, vanished. Not behind a corner, not retreating, just gone. We wanted to chalk it up to her being somebody that was high or something, but that couldn't explain the fact that she had just vanished. Well, she got too high. But I swear it didn't feel like she'd left. It felt like she'd just stepped out of sight, like she was still nearby and watching, just out of reach, waiting. And even now, when I pass that street, or see a cat staring from a window, I get that same cold twist in my stomach, that pressure in the air, that feeling that something unnatural is near, that if I turn too slowly or blink too long, she'll be there, still walking, still catching up. The woman in the hallway. My best friend, let's call her Mara. I've known her for almost 25 years. She isn't exactly an atheist, more like somebody who doesn't think too much about spiritual things. She grew up in a regular home. No religion, no rituals. She doesn't have any issues with me or other friends who believe in something. But she herself doesn't buy into ghosts, karma, or anything quote-unquote beyond. To her, the world is what you can see and touch. Ironically, she loves horror movies, haunted house attractions too, Halloween decorations and everything spooky, but only in the fun way, like a carnival. Mara and her ex-husband, Ben, they used to live in a small two-bedroom house built in the early 1940s. It had been slightly remodeled in the 1980s, but it still felt like an old house. A narrow hallway, wood floors that creaked, and a big oak tree in the front yard. This particular story happened around 12 years ago. Ben had a teenage son from a previous marriage, and he and Mara also had a little boy who was about 4 at the time. That evening, Ben and the teen went to watch a basketball game, so it was just Mara and her little boy at the home. She ran a bath for him and was sitting cross-legged on the bathroom floor. She was scrolling through her phone, looking at some kind of program detailing the specifics about beaver nuggets. The bathroom door was open. From the corner of her eye, she saw this tall-looking figure, and it glided past the hallway. She caught a glimpse of long, dark hair and a pale sweater. Someone heading toward the smaller bedroom. For a split second, she thought Ben had come home early. She called out, "Ben?" No answer. Something about the silence made her uneasy. She stood up, wrapped a towel around her son, and carried him to the bedroom. Then she went down the hall to check. No one. Living room empty, front porch empty. Car wasn't in the driveway. That's when she said a strange coldness washed over her. Not just goosebumps, but a deep chill that made her hand shake. She checked every door and window, and all locked. She called Ben, and he said that they were still at the game. Wouldn't be home for another hour. "Why? What happened?" she said. "I swear I saw someone in the house." That night, nothing else happened. Turned on all the lights, put on cartoons, and tried to shake off the feeling. A couple of months later, something even stranger occurred. One night, Mara and Ben were watching TV in the living room. Kids were asleep. She said Ben suddenly went stiff and his head dropped forward. He began making a low groaning sound, almost like he was choking, but not quite. His eyes were wide open, arms twitching. So she panicked, screaming his name, and when he snapped out of it, he looked confused and weak, like nothing had happened. Mara rushed him to the ER, terrified he'd had some sort of seizure or stroke. But after hours of tests, the doctors found absolutely nothing wrong. Moved out of the house later that year, not because of what happened, but because they'd found a bigger place. But Mara told me years later, "I never really felt alone in that house." When asked Ben afterward if he believed in ghosts now, he said, "I honestly don't know, man. I don't want to really believe it, But I believe it. I'd probably never sleep again." Well, I hope the opposite thing is happening for you guys. And to anybody else who is alone tonight, you got this. Sweet dreams. See ya.
Step beyond the ordinary with Paranormal M. Subscribe and enable notifications to delve into stories that challenge conventional understanding. Get ready to be amazed by our latest mind-bending narratives. Creepy Christmas. Potential paranormal visit. So due to having a family that don't really celebrate Christmas, due to religious reasons, I often spend Christmas with my girlfriend and her family. In my girlfriend's room at the top of her wardrobe is a music box, which was a gift from her mother from Christmas years ago, I believe. It's just a little wind-up music box that you twist and it plays "We Wish You Merry Christmas." Anyway, we'd all done the standard opening of the presents, pulled some crackers, said "Merry Christmas," etc., etc. Then me and the girlfriend and her mom went upstairs to put the presents somewhere out of the way. My girlfriend's mom was talking about her own mother who died a few years ago, and how she loved Christmas, and wished that she could still be there with them all. Straight after that, this music box starts going off on top of the wardrobe, way too high for anyone to have reached and turned, and nobody had even been near that part of the room. Also, interestingly, my girlfriend's room was previously her grandmother's room, and my girlfriend only moved into the room after the death of her grandmother. My girlfriend's mother believes it to be a message from her own mother, letting them all know that she's still with them. We're all not sure, but it was interesting timing nonetheless, and I have no idea how it would have been set off otherwise. Video chat ghost. I had a friend I made in Indonesia while I worked in Jakarta. I was chatting to her one night via Yahoo Messenger with the video on. This was back in 2010, a few months before I met my wife. I'd been chatting to her for some time, and at some point I noticed a girl behind her sitting on the floor. She was just chilling out, smiling with legs bent in front of her. I was really amused because my friend had been chatting to me for some time, and turns out she's been ignoring her friend the whole time. So I teased and say, "Hey, a head just popped up behind you," expecting her to say, "Oh, that's my friend such and such. She's just hanging out." Instead, she says, "What head? I'm alone." And I say, "There's a girl with glasses behind you. She looks totally freaked out now." I joked that she had a ghost, but I didn't mean it. It just looked like an ordinary young woman. And it kind of looked like the woman ducks down and then is gone. I ask my friend to get up so I can see her room, and it's empty. She says she's totally alone. My friend looks really frightened, and I try to calm her down, and I say it might have been imagining things. But I only said it to calm her down because she looked so scared. It was late, but at that time I regularly went to bed late and I felt pretty awake, mostly because text chatting always makes me a bit nervous for some reason. Then she says that 3 of her other friends told her that they can see a girl in her house. But she'd never seen the girl herself. They all described her as wearing glasses, except everyone who says that she's wearing different clothes. 2, say that it's a red dress, another a dark blue shirt, and for me she was wearing a white sort of blouse shirt and pants. Her glasses are big and square, and she looks like she's in her late teens or early 20s. Indonesians can be hard to age for me. Anyway, she tells me she basically didn't take any of her other friends seriously at all. Indonesians can be a bit superstitious. For example, I had an Indonesian colleague who was training to be some sort of shaman, and my friend was not into any of that stuff. Did not believe in ghosts or have any real religious beliefs. I didn't believe in ghosts either, and if she hadn't looked so freaked out and told me about her friends, I might have put it down to a hallucination. The only thing was that the video window was quite small, but the picture was clear. It wasn't glitchy or blocky. It would be weird if my imagination overlaid a hallucination so perfectly to appear partially obscured by my friend's desk on the floor behind her. The funny part of the story is that we both thought the other person was lying. I thought she was lying about there being nobody in the room, and she thought I was lying and didn't believe that I saw someone. Nevertheless, the fact that I saw this girl independently of her other friends, each of the other 3 also saw the girl independently of each other, intrigued my friend, and so she asked me questions about her. Although I only kind of saw her briefly, I still remember exactly what she looked like. The next time I chatted to my friend on a different day, we talked about it again. Apparently, she asked more questions of her other friends. She had a friend that claimed to be a psychic that supposedly communicated with the ghost, and the ghost said that she liked it in the house and that she was kidnapped, murdered there, back when the area used to be farmland. My friend lived outside of Jakarta in a place called Deepak. I don't know if I believe any of this bit. I only know what I saw, and what I saw just appeared to be an ordinary young woman, totally solid, not transparent or anything like that. I went back to Jakarta as part of the Southeast Asian holiday with my wife and met up with a friend. I asked her again if she was playing a joke on me, and she still claimed she wasn't, and we chatted about it again. If she's playing a prank on me, 1, she's an amazing actor. She really looked scared when I said there was a girl in her room. 2, she improvised the story about her friends also seeing a girl really quickly. And 3, really wasn't her style of humor. It made me more open to the idea of ghosts, but being scientifically trained, I still have it in my mind that I might have just been, the victim of a joke or a trick, maybe a trick of my own mind. I kept the transcript of the text chat. It still strikes me as very genuine on my friend's behalf. It's a shame I couldn't save the video, and even if I could at the time, I don't think I was seeing anything unusual, apart from the fact that I thought my friend was being really rude and ignoring a guest. I'll post the transcript, but there are bits of it I find cringy, because we had a running joke that we sort of jokingly flirted with each other, but it only makes sense in the context of our friendship, so it's a bit embarrassing. Stories from a church custodian. This church has been in the same location for nearly 200 years. Although the buildings have been updated, you can't go in the church outside of normal operating hours or in small groups without having an experience. I have several stories that I'd like to share, but I'll start with the first thing that happened to us. This takes place when we were around 12 or 13 years old. My friend, David the custodian's son, and I were at the church helping to set up for an event that was to take place later in the evening. While we weren't alone completely, there was only a handful of people in the building, all of whom were on the ground floor. We were tasked with the mission of retrieving a roll of tape from the second floor, so we take a shortcut through the back of the church that has a very narrow staircase that leads directly into the sanctuary. Our destination is the secretary's office, which is right beside the sanctuary. As we're walking through the sanctuary, we both hear what sounds exactly like a loud heartbeat, coming from no particular area. We run out of the sanctuary before even getting the tape and try to figure out where the sound may be coming from, coming up with the conclusion that it was a supernatural thing, considering that there's no type of instrument in our church that could have made it, and it was too loud to be coming from the ground floor where everyone else is. Fast forward a few weeks ago, and we're having a gathering at the church. The area where the previously mentioned staircase is, and has always been, a popular place for kids to play. It's out of the way. So I'm in there with the kids because most of them are my cousins, and I like to pick on them. They were all daring each other to go into the small storage area that's underneath the staircase. My youngest cousin, about 5, crawls out from under the stairs and says that he saw something underneath them. I ask him what it is, to which he replies, "I saw a beating heart." He's never heard me talking about hearing a heartbeat, so it gave me chills hearing it. I've also never considered him someone to have a wild imagination either. May have been a coincidence, but with all the experiences I've had in that church, I'm tempted to believe him. Stories from a Church Custodian, Volume 2. So, my church is haunted, but there are areas that one might consider a hot spot. These areas are the first floor men's bathroom, the bridal room, which is beside the staircase mentioned in my first story, and the baptismal, which is connected to the third floor bathrooms. After years of being the custodian's son and part-time custodian, my friend has experienced pretty much all the notable spirits and ghosts that are in the church. One of these spirits is a little bit more than a mild inconvenience, due to the fact that it likes to throw a wet paper towel in an otherwise clean hallway. My friend has told me about this spirit's antics before the story I'm about to tell occurred. My friend and I were around 16 when this happened. My friend was playing basketball with 2 other friends from church one day during summer break. This was midday, so there was no one at the church, and the church remained locked until we decided to go in. Being the custodian's son, my friend had a key. While taking a break from playing, all 3 of my friends swore that they saw the blinds in one of the windows on the 3rd floor move, like someone had brushed their hand from top to bottom. Me, not being a big basketball person, was not at the church to witness this part. Immediately after they saw the blinds move, they called me to tell me that they were going to go inside to investigate if I was interested in joining. I arrived a few minutes later and we went in. Obviously, being an old building, the church has a tendency to make noises. But some of these noises are very distinguishable footsteps. One of my buddies puts his phone on the voice recorder and sits in the first pew of this sanctuary, while we're all wandering about the rest of the building, hoping to record some of the noises that we keep hearing. We place the phone down and head to the 3rd floor. Nothing paranormal occurs on our first pass, but for some reason we decided to take the exact same path that we had just taken over and over. On our second go-around is when we notice something strange. There's a broom propped up in the doorway of the men's bathroom on the 3rd floor. This broom was without a doubt not there on our first pass. We don't think much of this until our 3rd trek, when we notice that the broom is still in the doorway, but in a different position. The thing about it was that the broom had not slid out at the bottom, but had been stood up. We continue on this path maybe 3 or 4 more times. Each time the broom has been moved to a different position in the same doorway. We decide that it's been long enough, so we go check on the phone that my buddy had in the sanctuary. We all go in and begin listening to the recording when we realize how stupid of an idea it was, because we couldn't tell what was us and what wasn't. That is, until we heard a loud tap that sounded like it was coming from a few pews behind the phone. The tapping gets closer, then one more tap even closer. Finally, there was what sounded exactly like a triple tap on the screen of the phone. After listening to the recording, we decide to check on the broom one more time. As we reach the 3rd floor, there are 2 very obvious things that have changed. 1, the broom is now in a different doorway. 2, there's wet paper laying in the middle of the hallway in front of the men's restroom. My friend claims to have seen a reflection that wasn't ours in the window across the hall from us, and that's when we decided that we were done ghost hunting for the day. A couple years later, and one of my buddies is helping his dad, who's a plumber, renovate one of the bathrooms in the church. As they're headed to the bathroom, my buddy spots a familiar sight. In the middle of the hallway lays a wet paper towel. Tales from a Church Custodian, Volume 3. The first story is about the parsonage that's beside the church. For those of you who may not know, a parsonage is a house close to the church that the pastor lives in. Anyway, at the time that this happened, we had a temporary pastor who had been living in the parsonage for a little over a year. The pastor had a son who was my age, and told me and my friend this story. While living in the parsonage, he always had a bad feeling just from being in there. His bedroom was in the basement where this story occurs. One day, our pastor goes into the basement to retrieve something from one of the storage areas. When he opened the door to the storage room, he was chased from the basement by a single crow. How the crow, if that's what it really was, got into the basement and then into a closed room is still a mystery to me. The second takes place in the ground floor bathroom. In this bathroom is a storage closet that has an unfinished floor that's just dirt. Pretty common in basements. This area is occasionally called the portal to hell by some of the kids my age due to the uneasy feeling that you get from being around it. As I was washing my hands, the door to the closet was pulled open fast enough to make wind. Luckily, I was only washing my hands because I was out of the bathroom in a second flat. The third story takes place in the second floor bathroom. This bathroom butts up against the storage and maintenance room. During a gathering at the church, I went to an unoccupied area of the church to do my business, as it were, because I'm a gentleman, Anyway, as I was sitting there, I heard a loud scratching sound coming from the cinder block wall right behind my head. Trying to stay calm, I told myself something had tipped over in the maintenance room, and that's what made that noise. I finished up and decided to look into the closet. The door, which was normally locked, opened right up to reveal that there was nothing in the room that had tipped, nor was there anything that could have even produced that noise in the first place. Stories from a Church Custodian, Volume 5. My friend David and I were at the graduation party, and we were telling one of his other friends about some of the strange things that go on at our church. David's friend didn't really believe the stories, so we decided to take him to the church that night, and we knew nobody else would be there. We get to the church around 9 p.m., unlock the doors, and go in. All the lights are off, so we're going room to room, turning them on as we go. Almost immediately, we hear footsteps on the floor above us. We finish going through the first floor, and as we're ascending the stairs, we hear the footsteps come to the top of the stairs, which is around a landing halfway up the staircase. In the window on the landing, we can clearly see an outline of what looks like a person. At this point, our friends decided that he's gotten enough proof to believe our stories and was ready to leave. We're standing in the parking lot facing the door, arguing over who's going to go back inside and turn off all the lights, when all of a sudden there are 3 distinct taps on the nursery window. The nursery's on the second floor and on the side of the building that we were facing, and that made the decision about turning the lights out a bit harder. Fun fact about the nursery. Once we got back to David's house, we were telling his mom, the actual custodian for the church, about what had happened, and she told us that she hated having to go in the nursery while she was alone, due to the feeling that she got in there. She also said that the old wooden rocking chair that was in there would almost always be rocking when she went in to clean, so she would go clean something else and wait for whoever was in the rocking chair to finish up. Paranormal Parish. I was not raised in a religious family. I like to think of myself as an analytical person and try to rely on evidence for most of my beliefs. Growing up in Midwestern Michigan, there was a time in my adolescence that I'm sure many people experience, a time when I was looking for some place to belong. While many teenagers drive their parents nuts by surrounding themselves with drinking and drugs, my rebellion was in the form of a church in my hometown. It had a pretty robust youth group, and they accepted me quickly. It was a safe place. A community that acted like a family that I could confide in. I threw myself into it and spent a few years being embroiled in everything they did, so much so that my parents questioned whether I was involved in a cult. This prolonged encounter with the church was an important step along my personal development, and would also become the catalyst for one of the most frightening moments in my life. This was during a mission trip that we took to Sarasota, Florida in the summer of 1997. Sarasota is a small city with a population of a little more than 50,000 people. The city was very socioeconomically divided, being populated by the very rich and the very poor. The mission trip was located at a modest Baptist church within the city. The purpose was to conduct a vacation Bible school, a VBS, for the children that lived in the neighborhood, mostly economically disadvantaged youth. I knew nothing else about the church. We were given no information about the congregation or beliefs ahead of time. The only background provided was that our youth pastor, David, made contact with this small church and agreed to donate our time to help coordinate the VBS program. I was relatively close with several of the people on the trip. However, we were joined by a student who was not part of our youth group named Alvin. I do not remember exactly why he came, as I was never close to him, but I remember being told that Al's mother wanted him to be a Christian in contrast to their Asian American heritage, an idea at the time that seemed to be pretty disinterested in. A dry, straight-laced young man, he was almost the opposite personality of my friends and me, largely immature, outgoing goof-offs looking for attention. Nevertheless, he attended the trip with the rest of us. We all loaded onto the bus and headed south. We arrived in Sarasota, got to work, and the first part of the trip was pretty uneventful. Nothing seemed unusual. We worked, teaching certain classes ranging in topics that a normal, non-denominational Christian Sunday school would usually teach. It wasn't until the last couple of days of the trip where things started going off the rails. Close to dusk, the second to last day of the trip, our group was outside playing kickball with the children while we waited for their parents to pick them up. It was a hot summer day in Florida, so many of us Michigan kids were not used to the humid hot evenings that followed. I decided to go into the church and get a drink and cool down, escaping the large number of gnats that constantly accosted me whenever I stepped outside. The church itself was made out of white plaster, common style in Florida. The exterior was peeling, but the inside seemed to have been cared for meticulously. The dark green carpet was everywhere except for the chapel, which itself was burgundy with gold designs. The building of the church was shaped like a T. You entered the double doors at the bottom of the T. The long hallway had an extended mirror, and this was attached to one wall and a sitting bench was on the other. There was wood, sort of a, well, they're saying beadboard, but there was wood breadboard type paneling that went halfway up the wall to the mirror. As you continued down the hall at the T-junction, you could take a left and walk into the chapel, or you could go right and walk into the large dining area that was filled with tables. I walked through the doors at the bottom of the T, and as teenagers really won't do, I glanced at the mirror to check my own reflection. Check the outfit, the hair, overall appearance. Adolescence is a vain time. Anyway, as I looked into the mirror, I saw Alvin sitting on the bench opposite the mirror, just looking at me. I quickly questioned what he was doing and sighed away from everybody else. "Hey Al, what are you doing, man?" "Don't like kick..." And as I'm saying it, interrupting my sentence, he smiled in what felt like a disingenuous, menacing simper. He then raised his hand, formed a gun-shaped hand gesture, and winked while pointing at me, clicking his tongue to make a sound. Acting in a way that seemed uncharacteristic for who I knew Alvin to be, I chuckled and turned away from the mirror to speak to him. As I did that, I realized there was no one there. I looked back at the mirror to confirm that I was alone in the hallway. I didn't understand. I didn't just see him out of the corner of my eye. I mean, at first I did, but then I looked right at him, into his eyes, with the mirror simply as a conduit. I heard the sound of his tongue making what would soon be a familiar clicking sound. When the image of Al disappeared, the fright washed over me in what seemed to be similar to a panic attack. A tingling that transformed my warm body into a shaky, nervous husk of who I usually was. I ran outside and grabbed the first person that I came in contact with, my friend Ronnie. Ronnie and I were not extremely close, but we had fun together because we were both outgoing, obnoxious, overconfident males that focused more on the fun than the purpose of our visit. When I approached him, I immediately saw in his eyes that he knew something was wrong. "Dude, I don't know what's happening. I just saw something super weird. I feel like I'm losing my mind." "What happened?" Ronnie asked, starting to smile with some humor at how freaked out I seemed. I walked inside and looked in the mirror to see Al just sitting there, smiling at me. But it wasn't Al. It looked like him, but when I started talking to him, he just stared at me and made this gesture. At this point, I showed him the finger pointing and the winking gesture. Something about the way I recreated the look seemed to take the smile from Ronnie's face. When I started talking to him and I turned to continue the conversation, Al wasn't there. As if we were thinking the exact same thing, we turned to look out and find where Alvin was at that moment. Our eyes scanned the crowd in opposite directions, both arriving at the same point where Al sat, watching the kickball game. He was not partaking, as I remember him to be a pretty sober, pensive kid, not the kickball type, and definitely not one who would have given me some weird pointing gesture while winking. Al is all the way over there, so what was it, a ghost, like a demon or something? Ronnie asked, shocked. Dude, how the crap should I know? We spoke in a very strange, surfer-like dialect for two mid-Michigan boys. I then saw this look of what seemed to be understanding wash over Ronnie's face, like it all made sense to him. He said, "You know what this is, right? This is Satan. He's trying to distract you from doing God's work. He has no power here. Let's go tell him." I followed Ronnie into the church like we were on some mission. It was empty again, but I felt this cold, uneasy feeling as soon as we stepped inside. As I said, it was the middle of summer in Florida. We were inside an old church with a barely functioning AC unit, but I remember instantly being chilled. Ronnie starts yelling, "Hey, Satan, you ain't got nothing on us. Bring it. You can't stop us. What you got?" Did I mention that we were overconfident? We waited in silence for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Nothing happened. We looked at each other, seeing what seemed to be a creeped out sort of factor showing up in each of our faces. We paused for a split second, then began laughing out loud at the ridiculousness of the situation. Maybe I just overreacted. Dramatic teenagers and whatnot. The evening ended after the last adult arrived to pick up their child. My young group that I loaded the bus and headed back to the condo that we were renting all came with. It was dark by this time, and I had calmed down a bit, momentarily forgetting what had happened. The bus ride took some time, so I usually would just sit there, looking out the window at the landscapes that were usual, kind of unusual to me, a boy being from the north. We drove along the coast, passing interesting architecture surrounded by unfamiliar foliage, common to Florida ecosystems. As we rode, I looked out the window and saw a person sitting on a large stone sign for a different church, a Roman Catholic cathedral. I squinted to see him, as I was curious what that character was doing, sitting on such a fancy-looking stone slab sign. As the bus got closer and closer, my growing fright started to grow yet further, and I started to realize that that person sitting on the slab was someone I knew. The person was Alvin. He was sitting on the sign, looking down at his feet as he kicked them, resembling that of a much younger boy. As we passed, Alvin, quote-unquote, sitting on the sign, he looked up from his feet and looked directly at me. His eyes were not Alvin's eyes, they were different. Another older, wiser man's eyes, piercing through the motion and distance. He looked at me and smirked with that menacing, threatening grin. As we began to pass, I turned my head to look to the front of the bus. Just a few seats ahead of me, Al sat, quietly doing what I had been doing a few moments before, looking at the water. I looked back out the window as we passed. The other, Alvin, raised his hand into a familiar gun-pointing gesture and pointed at me. What was even more strange, though, is I could hear the clicking sound in my head. And I'm not sure how to explain this, but it wasn't coming from me. It wasn't my common inner monologue voice, it was someone else. Something else. He winked. For lack of a better phrase, I began to freak out. He shouted and drew attention from some of my friends, my assistant youth pastor Jason and my pastor David. I remember thinking that I was losing my mind, The intensity of the faux Alvin eyes and the click of his tongue playing on repeat in my brain. No one seemed to understand my panic. David said we would talk once we got settled back at her condo. I guess I should just take a breath. We arrived at the condo. It was lavish accommodations to a small-town kid, causing me to wonder how one would arrange payment for such a place, especially for a gaggle of teenagers. It had tall, vaulted ceilings and the decor was designed in the early 90s, so it was fitted with brass lighting fixtures and lightly stained oak furnishings. Exiting the bus, my knees were shaky. Fog of embarrassment settled over me as other kids gazed with an obvious wonder that only children would lack the decorum would kind of show, right? My youth pastors took me into the back bedroom away from the other kids. Gave me a pint of Haagen-Dazs ice cream. Good choice. That assisted in calming my nerves. Not surprised. Once settled, they proceeded to talk to me about what they thought was happening. David gave his version of what he believed was transpiring. There is a war happening. A war between heaven and hell, where angels and demons are in a battle for the souls and sanity of God's followers. And what you and Ronnie did was incredibly stupid. You challenged Satan to a battle that you cannot win. He's too powerful. That was his foothold. You need to be careful. This did very little to calm my nerves. It seemed uncharacteristically morose of David to be that blunt, especially with a teenager, and yet he continued. Do not do that again. If you keep doing the right thing, God will protect you. But you cannot tell anyone else that this happened. It spreads fear that Satan thrives on. Being a naive young Christian at the time I believed in, I thought that this war could seem possible, but I also trusted a mentor that I shouldn't share my story, and I would follow that advice for years. I went to bed early that night, trying to move past this experience. Alvin's face and the clicking gesture continued to haunt my thoughts. It didn't work. The next day was our last at the church. We were done coordinating the VBS program, but the leaders of the church wanted to treat us to a dinner as a way of saying thanks. I didn't think about it at the time, but it was very strange that we hadn't met the pastor of the church until this dinner. Beforehand, we had packed up all of our belongings. We were prepared to leave once we finished dinner. We all sat on the east side of the church, in the dining area with all the tables, eating the spaghetti dinner that they had provided us. It was a happy scene, I guess. I looked around at everybody enjoying the meal, laughing and joking around at the tables. Suddenly the back door of the church opened, and a cold gust of wind rushed past me. Bizarre for a Florida summer afternoon. And this was followed by the entrance of a tall, elderly man and two slightly younger women behind him. As with all members of the youth group, I'd never met this man before. He was introduced to us as the pastor, but none of us recall ever hearing his name or first or last. All I could focus on was his eyes. They seemed familiar to me, although I couldn't place them. They weren't kind eyes, although I couldn't articulate that in my mind at the time. He spoke a short sentence or two of thanks to the group, and then proceeded to move past the tables, sharing short statements of small talk, referring to my friends as guys and ladies, or in the case of Ronnie, who was sitting next to me, young man. He also slowly approached me. I continued to eat spaghetti, because free food. The pastor moved deliberately behind me until I could feel his bony hand touch my right shoulder. I turned around to look and saw the pastor glaring straight into my eyes. Not a polite stranger's glance, but a deep, disturbing glance. Those eyes. I had seen those before. He took his hand off my shoulder and spoke. "Hey, how's it going?" Something was wrong, and it was immediately obvious to me. No one had met this pastor. He didn't know any of us from Adam, and he referred to everybody as such, with generic titles like son, darlin'. But he knew my name. He looked at me like he knew me, and then he did it. He smiled in that familiar, menacing way, lifted his hand and made the pointing gesture while winking. He closed it out with the tongue-clicking sound. I shot up, backed up quickly, clambered for my footing as I knocked over some empty chairs and ran out of the dining hall. I ran to the adjacent chapel and did the only thing that came to mind at the moment. Sat in the pew and cried. My pastor and my pastor's wife, Kathy, followed me shortly after. I expected to hear their voice of reassurance. The kind people that had been mentors to me for years. That is not what followed. "What are you doing? That was the rudest thing I've ever seen. What's wrong with you?" "You're acting like a baby," Kathy exclaimed. This was extremely uncharacteristic of both of them, so I knew something was wrong. They were usually very calm, kind people in public. So I ran from them. I ran out of the chapel, down the long hallway, past the mirror where I'd originally saw who I thought was Alvin, and out the front doors. Followed directly after me, Kathy stepped out of the door before the door even closed. I turned to see her expression transform from angry hunter to concerned caregiver. "What's wrong, honey? Why are you crying?" I knew immediately why the anger left her. She had left the church. She was outside. Something was wrong with that place. After discussing what I felt had happened, I never went that church again. Waited outside for the rest of my group to finish eating. Afterwards, David, with a small group of us, did some weird type of ritual where we anointed the church and its door with oil. He read some scriptures that were unfamiliar to me, and we boarded the bus and left. Haven't spoken with David or Kathy in decades. But directly after this happened, Kathy, while coming short of saying I was lying, disagrees with the sequence of events. She seems to believe that she heard me making a ruckus outside, so she followed me directly out there, concerned for my well-being. David remembers being angry at me, and while he seems more docile out of the building, he seemed to treat me differently afterwards. The church itself seems to have been disbanded. I cannot find any mention of the church on the internet, and members of the youth group that I have kept in touch with have gone to Sarasota and not been able to find the same location, even though we took the same route several times a day. One particular friend said that there's just a field where the building used to be, as if this experience had never even happened. Because David had told me that I shouldn't talk about what had happened, I didn't discuss this experience with any of my church friends, at least not for a long while after. A few years later, I spoke about these events with friends I made outside of the church, and my stories often met with a mixture of interest and skepticism, and I often find myself in this weird experiencing this phenomenon on repeat in my head again. I've since left the church and personally have arrived at a certain level of being agnostic. I like to think that I don't believe in ghosts or demons, but I also cannot deny that which happened to me in the summer of '97. I do not have an explanation, and there are too many things that do not make sense. I hope that I just had a mental break of some sort, because the alternative is much more frightening. Looking for some input on household paranormal incidents. I live in a house with my mom, sister, stepdad, stepsister, 2 dogs, and my cat. My stepdad is a major paranormal skeptic. My sister is a little over-believing, and my mom and stepsister are mostly neutral. A lot of my family's been experiencing some really scary things. My grandpa's moved because of it. and it's sort of common knowledge that we can all tell if something's paranormal or not. My grandpa has had weird, terrifying things happen that he'll insist aren't paranormal at all, and some things that are slightly less scary that he'll insist were. I can generally tell if somebody else is telling the truth about some experience, but for myself, I just can't tell the way that they can. And I think it's partially because of my anxiety, which is constantly making my thoughts contradict themselves. Anyway, I have several seemingly disconnected incidents that I guess I can just bullet point out. They're over my entire span of living here, so I can't really remember the order. I'm standing in my sister's doorway. I was leaning on the door frame, reading over a thing that she wrote for school. She had wanted me to look it over, and the dog ran past me. Kinda shoving me a little, I said, "That's rude, Mr. Sanders." The dog's name is Barry Sanders. "We don't watch football, don't ask me." A couple seconds later, I hear my sister crying and look up. The dog is asleep in her lap and was there the entire time, so whatever ran past me was not our dog. We can't talk about it out loud because it still makes us choke up just how scared we were in that moment. I was laying in bed. It was pretty dark, but I wasn't asleep yet. I was just sitting on my phone waiting to get tired. I heard a really loud bang come from my closet, and my cat ran over and laid directly on my neck, which she does when either one of us gets scared. I already had Snapchat open, so I decided to start recording to see if it happened again, because I was pretty sure that there were animals living in the walls. But my parents insisted that they weren't that big of a deal, so I was hoping something else would happen so I could have a bit of proof that I had reason to be bothered. You can't see anything in the video though, there's only sound. At the time that didn't faze me, because all I needed was proof the animal made sounds. Instead of another noise from the closet or the walls, there was a click, which you can barely make out in the video, but from my bed, I could see that it was the door handle turning. After that, the closet door swung back and forth, creaking extremely loudly when it normally hardly does at all. For the 11 seconds, if I remember correctly, that I kept recording, I stopped because I wanted to turn the light on and immediately went to show the video to my mom. It happened another time after that, at night again, but I didn't record. I didn't feel threatened, but I did start keeping my laundry basket in front of the closet door and haven't had it happen really since then. This one is possibly the scariest because no one's been able to explain it in a way that matches up with the story. Me and my sister were in the kitchen. Both parents were taking a nap and had been so for about an hour. We were the only ones in that kitchen for at least the previous hour. On the counter, there were some dirty dishes, and out of nowhere, my mom's measuring cup just explodes into tiny pieces all over the kitchen. We couldn't even walk anywhere. We had to yell for our parents to put on shoes and sweep the floor around us, that way we could go and shake the glass out of our hair and clothes. I've looked it up and found some things about Pyrex measuring cups exploding, but not to the extent ours did, and ours was not a Pyrex. It was a really old one with all the measuring letters engraved, so they wouldn't wash off. My grandma had given it to my mom about 3 or 4 years earlier. I was looking at different measuring cups for the sake of this post, and it was the same general look as the bread bunny, but I don't believe ours was. Once I was on the phone with a friend, and 2 things on my wall, one hung canvas and one hung glass frame, both fell at the exact same time. That's probably the one that can be explained the most easily, I guess, and it's also the shortest, but it's still weird. Similar to the dog incident, we, my stepsister and I, once opened the front door to get ready to go to school, and something large and black, a little bigger than our lab, looked like it ran through the house. However, we knew it wasn't the dog because he was already inside. And again, this was bigger than him. I don't think it was the same situation as the dog incident, though, because it didn't sort of push us at all and didn't really have a specific shape. Whereas the previous one was so much like our dog that he had been in another room when it happened, we would have thought about it again. Or we wouldn't have even thought about it again, we would have assumed it was him. But this was just sort of a black blob that appeared solid but wasn't. And by the time we turned around, it was gone. There's some other smaller things, like canned goods falling over when they shouldn't be able to do that by themselves. The shower curtain being open, it was almost definitely closed before. Things going missing and showing up in odd places. My family also has quite a bit of paranormal and non-paranormal disturbing backstory if anybody might be interested in more context. Specifically, some things that happened when I was in my early teens. Some things my grandpa said, who my stepdad bought the property from, and my family's very weird trademark of having near-death experiences and dying young, and how death follows us around in general. I really don't know if I'm looking to be proven wrong or told that I can't be. I guess it would be nice to get some other opinions. I've also neglected to include the door video, because as I said, it's really only audio, and I believe that was the first paranormal-aligned incident that I actually paid attention to. And it was over 2 years ago now. If anybody really thinks it'll help, I'll try to find it, but I honestly don't think it'll provide much since it's just the sound of a door creaking, and that could be faked pretty easily. Like I said, I'm willing to provide whatever background info you guys might want for anybody looking to give me some input, advice, explanations, or whatever else. I got Reddit specifically to post this somewhere because all my other social media accounts are semi-professional to mostly professional. And while this isn't a throwaway, I definitely don't want to look like an idiot on my regular public profiles. I met my daughter from the future. I'm a 21-year-old with no kids. It's important to know for the story. So I went with my dog for a walk this morning, and I was about to cross the street when I noticed a girl about my age staring at me from the other street parallel to the one I was on. I first didn't think a lot about it, and I just kept going. Then I saw how she crossed the street to come to the one that I was walking on while still staring at me. We crossed ways, and when we got closer, I could see her expression, and it was something like pity and nostalgia. It felt like she somehow knew me from somewhere. Well, we crossed paths, but of course I didn't stop and stare at her back, so I kept going. Then I turned to look at her once more, and she was still standing on the same spot I walked past her 5 seconds ago. She was looking straight in my face with the same expression of pity. I continued walking, and after a few seconds I turned again. She was still there, staring at me with that exact same expression as last time I turned back to look at her before I continued my walk. I don't know why or how, but a thought just came directly into my mind, without any previous context. In my head, I was convinced I guess this girl was my daughter from the future, and she was looking at me that way because I died. She was missing me. The whole day, I'm still really freaked out by this experience, and I thought about it. Look at my dad died when I was 7, and the night of his death, my mom dreamed that he came to her in a dream, talked to her, and said that he was okay, and that she doesn't want to be worried about him. What if in my daughter's timeline I died, and this moment was me in her dream, seeing her for the last time like my father saw my mother for the last time in her dream? My father seemed to recognize my mother in the dream, and somehow I had that instant thought without previous context that that girl was my daughter. I recognized her instantly. I get shivers down my spine when I'm writing this. Like I said, I never had to do with such things. I'm an atheist. I don't even believe in God. I've never believed in ghosts, but I have no explanation for this. Maybe I'm just crazy. A recurring dream that I can't explain as anything other than paranormal. So we moved into an old farm a few years ago. I did lots of renovation work, found lots of strange things, boarded up rooms, bricked up entrance to a cellar, loads of old abandoned items left there too. The thing that's really bothering me is in our main kitchen, there's a small ladder there. When we renovated, we wired some electrics and plumbing into there. There's a small larder there. When we renovated, we wired some electrics and plumbing into there, and the room is used to store fridge, foods, washing machine, things like that. However, shortly after we started using that room, I began having a recurring nightmare. During the nightmare, I'm stuck in a wall cavity. I can hear moaning, screaming, crying, scratching sounds. I scream for help, but nobody or nothing is there to hear me. I'll usually wake quite agitated and worked up from this nightmare. I've never had this nightmare before we moved into this house. After the first couple of times, I noticed a small pattern. I only had that dream when the door to the larder was left open. I dismissed it at first, but after a couple more occurrences, I started making sure it was shut before I went to bed. The nightmare stopped. Now, I've always been a bit skeptical, you could say, and I would dismiss it as maybe a subconscious thing, knowing it was shut enough to stop the dreams. However, shortly after I had the nightmare again that night, I got up to check the door was open, closed it, bolted it, and went back to bed. I asked my fiancé about it, and he had got up in the night to go get a drink, and he left the door open. I told him about it, and he was also a bit skeptical, but thought it was odd. Regardless, he agreed to make sure it was shut in the future too, to make me feel better. We've been really strict about this, and the doors remained closed every night since just under a year. 2 days ago, my aunt had to borrow the washing machine. She lives on the farm with us, but in a separate building, as hers had broken down apparently. She forgot about her washing and just popped it in to get after I'd already gone to bed. She left the door open, and I had the nightmare again. I can say with 100% certainty I only have that dream when I'm in this house and that door is open, even when I'm not aware of it being open. I'm struggling to find a non-paranormal explanation for this. Is my kitchen, or rather the larder, haunted? I saw a post earlier about alien abductions, and it sounds very similar to what I went through as a kid. When I lived in the apartments, at a young age, I would always have nightmares. This is normal for all kids, of course, for them to be so afraid that they cover their heads in bed. Unless the mass population, I would have these strange feelings, and I'll be compelled to run outside as far as I could from the house. Obviously, there was maybe only things like this happening 10 years ago, so my memory of why I did this is still foggy. There was a time I ran to my friend's apartment building, some blocks away, and I banged on the door and his dad answered. I remembered telling him somebody was out to get me. He then simply tells me to go home. So I do. As if the trance broke and I went home still slightly shaken, but I was perfectly fine and slept well. So this happened so frequently, I remembered my dad locking my bedroom door from the outside with a rope so I wouldn't run away again. There was a time he caught me sleepwalking around the house at 11 p.m., but the rope didn't really help much. On one particular night, I had this insane feeling of fear and desire to get out of my room. I was so much in fear that I forcibly opened the door to my room, the rope snapped, and I ran outside. Everything after this went fuzzy, and I then remembered it being around 6 or 7 a.m., and I was a couple blocks away from my apartment home. I remember just walking around, and I was legit wondering why I was walking this far away, and how did I stay up the whole night? I walked back home and just in time to see my mom at the door. She thought I came out to help her with groceries, so I never really told her the truth. Not long after that, the nightmare stopped. I ended up moving farther south to Jersey, but the sleepwalking and the sleep talking never stopped, till this day. Meeting the entity on the roof. This happened to me about 4 or 5 years ago while I was living in a major metropolitan area of the Pacific Northwest. My wife and I lived in a condo on the second floor of this oldish 2-story building. While my wife was back home in Texas for a long weekend, weird shit started happening in our home. On the first night I was alone, I started hearing footsteps on the roof. Mind you, these sounded like stomps and not like little feet, just in case you thought it might have been a raccoon, possum, or some other night creature. They were loud, as if someone was running in circles right above my bed. Really freaked me out, but I tried to ignore it. Following night, my sister and mom stayed the night because they were visiting from a few towns over. That night, I let my mom and sister sleep in the room as I slept on the couch. My sister and my mom heard the stomps too. They didn't know what to make of it, so they woke me up to go check the roof. I went outside and looked, but there was nothing to be seen. They left the next day and we still didn't have a clue what the fuck was going on. It was getting really freaky by this point, so the night they left, I slept by myself in the condo again. I laid there without being able to sleep, and by 2 or 3 a.m. the stomping began. It would run all across the roof, and when it would get to the room, it would start stomping hard. So I'm really freaked out at this point, and I decided to load my handgun just in case it's some crazy homeless person, or someone being crazy on the roof at 3 a.m. It kept running on the roof as I loaded the gun when all of a sudden the stomping stops. Then I hear a loud thump by the door, as if someone had jumped from the roof to the front of my door. It knocked on my door 3 times, loud as fuck. At this point, I'm paralyzed in fear, but I said, fuck it. Whatever it is, it's gonna get a bullet straight to the head. I walked carefully towards the door, opened the door as fast as I could, but no one was there. I checked the roof under the stairs, and there was no sign of anyone. The fear I felt made me run cold through all my body because I still felt its presence, but I just couldn't see anyone. I went back inside, locked the door, and laid in bed with the gun next to me. I was terrified, couldn't sleep all night. The next night, my wife comes home. I told her everything that had been going on, and she just couldn't believe it. She asks me how come I only heard it when she was gone and never happened in the past when she was here. I told her I didn't know why it happened, and why it happened that weekend when she wasn't around, but it did happen. I had witnesses, my sister and mom. They also heard the stomping. So I'm not going crazy, and this isn't just my imagination. I'm perfectly healthy, mentally and physically. So this couldn't have been some weird mental disorder. We go to bed together that night. She tells me not to really worry, that I probably had smoked a little too much weed during the weekend. I'm a bit pissed at her because she doesn't believe me and thinks I'm being superstitious. As we're falling asleep, something pulls on my toe. A hard pull on my toe, not some light touch. It was a violent pull on my big-ass toe. I get up and wake up my wife and tell her. By this point, she thinks I'm having some sort of hallucination that I should probably not smoke weed at all anymore. And even I kind of started believing I was losing my mind. But as we're getting comfortable to go back to sleep, the entity violently pulls her toe as well. She gets out of the bed in complete disbelief and trembling in fear. We turned the lights on, checked to see if someone was under the bed, but there was absolutely nothing and no one. We couldn't get back to sleep that night, and a few days later the nail on my big-ass toe turned a light shade of purple. What the fuck happened? I have no fucking idea, and to this day I have no fucking clue. Okay, guys, this title, I can't even read it, but I'm going to read it verbatim, just in case anyone's still awake and wants to chuckle. And no disrespect, by the way. You might just be writing this scared. I'm if this a story sub, but this happened. Am deny don't know how live anymore. That was good. Okay. I live in eastern Washington state, and all my life I've always wanted to experience some things unnatural. This night I had just finished playing Among Us with some friends on Discord. I went out to my living room for, I guess, my kitchen. They're both connected, and I grabbed a glass of water. I looked at the orchard, and we have a small chicken coop in that orchard. And underneath one of the apple trees to the right of the chicken coop for the small chicks, I saw a pile of sticks. I've never seen these piles before. I thought that was weird. I looked at it jokingly. I was like, oh, it's like a gnome or something, since I'd recently heard a story about them. And then I felt this feeling of being watched. Yes, Gecko. So I went around the cupboard and I peeked at it, and I got this disgusting feeling of dread I've never felt. I've never felt so small and weak before in my life. I never thought I'd feel something so wrong. I felt hunted. I felt like an animal. I started heading towards my room, and I looked back, and it felt wrong, so wrong. I can't get over the feeling of horror that I felt when I looked back at the window. I messaged a friend on Messenger about it, and then it started happening. A bump on my window, and he told me to record it. I recorded it, and it happened again, and I know that there's no difference, no trees by my window. The closest tree is a pear tree, about 4 yards away from my window. Cut that bloody thing every year because cutting the grass around that fucking thing is miserable. I know that the pear tree didn't touch my window bit, but it assured me that maybe that dreadful feeling was there, and it left us small, and I tried to ignore it. Confusing. I tried to watch something. I need to fight the feeling of fear. I even tried to ask for help, but my parents' room was on the way by that window, and when I peeked it felt wrong. I ran back, and that's when I heard it. I heard this beating. It was like a heartbeat. I couldn't tell where it came from. I think it was on my roof. I got scared, and no, I hid underneath my covers. I hid underneath my covers like a little bitch. I was scared. I've never been so scared in my life. The closet, this feeling that I was being assaulted by a bunch of dogs. When I lived in Peru. And that's when I started hearing it, this moaning, this horrid moaning. And I asked my friend what to do, and he told me to record, and I did. I recorded it, and I sent it to him. By the way, guys, there's no periods or anything. I'm just raw dogging this. I sent it to him, and I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was a man or an animal. What was it? I sent him 2 videos, but then I felt the cover move up by my leg, and I felt it grab me. It picked me up with one arm, or I don't know what, its appendage, or some fucking thing. It was a mess. If you could grab hold of me with that entire arm in a small room, and I saw its face illuminated by an aquarium light. It was vibrating. I don't know what it was. I don't know what that thing was. I just can't describe its face. It's just, I just can't. My body shakes and goes numb when I think about it. I know it has a mouth. It laid me on the ground by the side of my bed, and it put his big arm underneath my chest and put his mouth next to my face, and it said it in perfect English. It said it the most perfect English I could ever heard, and it was as if a dog decided to speak. It sounded wrong, but it was so fucking perfect. And it told me, don't peek. And as abruptly as it came, it left. I don't know how it got in my room. I feel so unsafe. Oh my God. How did it get into my room? How? I don't know. All my life I wanted to feel high. Wanted to see something unnatural. Something supernatural. I've never been religious. But I said this night fucked me. I don't know what it was. It's a face. It left me intact, and no, it wasn't sleep. It moved me from one to another, and I sat there shaking, and I fucking pissed myself. I don't know what to do. I've never been so afraid in my life. My friend told me to ask on forums for what this was, and I'm starting here. Please, if anyone knows what this thing was, please tell me if you're into cryptid or monsters, ghosts, or anything of that, or aliens. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's not fucking worth it. It's not worth it. Editor? No more stories like that. That is, well, I hope somebody got a chuckle out of it. With all due respect. Moving on. Strange encounter during a time of grief. So this happened to my family a few years back, but I believe it's a rather interesting unexplained phenomenon. I just discovered this sub. A little background before I get started. Me and my mom and my uncle all reside in Texas. Grandmother, uncle 2, and cousins 2 reside in New Mexico, where my grandmother has a shop. Cousin 1 is off at college in Colorado. Uncle 1 decides to go visit cousin 1 at school, but on his way stops in New Mexico to see the family for a few days. While visiting, a strange woman stops in the shop and asks for directions. She and Uncle 1 get to chatting, and I'm not sure of the specifics that lead to this conversation, but she proceeds to tell him about a dream that she had recently. She says that in her dream she was driving through the mountains and suddenly came to a halt. She realizes that there was a mountain lion lying dead in the middle of the road. She gets out to see if there's anything she can do. But when she approaches the mountain lion, it takes life again and runs away into the mountains. The conversation comes to an end and the woman takes her directions and goes about her way. Uncle 1 brushes the whole thing off as odd, but doesn't really give it much more thought. Days later, Uncle 1 convinces Uncle 2 to accompany him to Colorado to visit Cousin 1. There's a lot of numbers here. It's important to note here that Uncle 2 has emphysema. Where they were visiting was a much higher altitude, and Uncle 2 ended up getting severe altitude sickness. It became so bad that he ended up in the hospital in an induced coma. Me, my mom, aunt, grandma, and cousins 2 all traveled to Colorado to be there with him. Days turn into weeks, turn into months, and he's not getting better, let alone coming out of his coma. One day we're all tired and stressed as things are looking grim. We're trying to decide where to eat when one of cousin 2 asks for Applebee's. No one else wants to eat there. We try to talk her into something local, not a chain. She's insistent, and since Uncle 2 is her father, the family takes pity and caves. This is where things get weird. As we're sitting at our table, the same odd woman from the whole other state from months before appears standing beside our table. She looks Uncle 1 dead in the eyes and says, "It's time to go." And in the blink of an eye, she's gone with nowhere to be found. Moments later, the hospital calls and says it's time to take Uncle 2 off the life support. We abandon our meals, head to the hospital, and they do just that. Uncle 1 never sees the strange woman again. Stuck in deja vu. This happened nearly 10 years ago, but I, a 32-year-old female, can't shake the experience. So I have had deja vu 1,000 times, like many people, but it always seems to be gone in the blink of an eye. However, when I was in my early 20s, I had an entirely different experience. I was hanging out with a couple of friends, Dane and Corey, at Dane's house. Now, I've had multiple strange experiences there, mostly paranormal. Dane has lost 2 fathers, and he believes, as I do, that his biological father has stuck around, but that's neither here nor there. So me, Dane, and Corey are all hanging out in this shed in the backyard where we normally do. We're just sitting there chatting when all of a sudden I got struck by a serious case of deja vu. Instead of it ending in an instant, it seemed like it was never going to stop. My heart started racing and the guys just could see that there was something wrong. I told them what was happening, and the only way I could describe it was that it felt like a film strip stuck on repeat in my head was playing, like when a CD skips. I started to panic as the minutes passed. I felt disoriented, but I knew I needed to get out of that shed. It had been about 5 minutes since it started, which may not seem very long, but it felt very long. I tried to gain my bearings and stood up, though I quickly tumbled back into the chair. I tried again and stumbled out of the shed. Dane's backyard has a big, beautiful oak tree right outside the shed. As I stepped outside and my feet hit the earth's surface, I felt a calm come over me. A breeze came out of nowhere and the branches of the tree started moving rhythmically. It's hard to explain, but I felt planted, just like the tree, like I couldn't move. I felt an odd connection with the universe, like some force was trying to connect with me, as if an invisible laser beam came from the sky straight to my mind. This frightened me even more, though. The guys came out to check on me and snapped me out of it, broke down in tears. We decided to go back to the house and I told them what happened. Corey was freaked out and left. I kept telling Dane about the film strip. I felt scared and out of it, not like myself. I really thought I was going to have to check myself into a mental institute, so I decided to go home. Once I got home, I calmed down, but I still felt uneasy for the rest of the night. I was too scared to sleep. I had this giant book of different phenomenons and unexplained mysteries of the world that I've glanced through a few times. I looked up déjà vu, and sure enough, right there on the page, my exact words were printed. It said that sometimes déjà vu can be long and frightening and be described as a film strip stuck on repeat. That's the end of the stories tonight, guys. I'm sorry, I'm still having flashbacks from 2 stories back of endless run-on sentences. And again, no disrespect, it was just, I haven't had any coffee, and my gecko's going insane. So, as usual, sleep tight. See ya.